Okay, then I can't.
All day?
Well,
Here, let's leave a note to
for Ally, yeah.
bring here.
Sunday.
Friends, this is my last Bible study with you all. And we will I put in the announcements, I just trying to read the room last week when we said both Charity and I will not be here next week. You all are more than welcome to continue without us, if you'd like, but I didn't get a sense that everybody was keen on that. But what do you tell me otherwise?
Lauren can set this up.
Lauren can set it up.
We'll be in the building.
You've got David driving the ship.
Yeah, we
I'm
did
sure.
it once before, because you were trying and you were trying.
All right, let's do it. Just do it, guys.
Conflict, I already know that I can't be here,
Yeah.
so.
Is
Same.
anybody
Yeah.
going to
I
be?
go
Oh, yeah, maybe there's nobody
Is
here.
next week Bibles?
No, that's the
No,
next
that's
week.
the following.
Yeah,
And then there's no Bible study that week either for that.
we could do Zoom only.
I didn't check.
So
my
what-
calendar.
What's next week? Is Bible
I-
study, is Bible school next week or the week after?
The
Vacation Bible School is the week after, but both that week and this coming week, Charity and I are not available for Bible study.
I'm on vacation next week.
Yeah, and I'm at a
Oh,
conference.
I
We
know.
get to take a vacation.
Sort of.
Well, yeah. Do you all want to keep Bible study and go without us? You like the tone in my voice? You want to go ahead and do it?
David, what are your thoughts? Because I would like to continue with
you.
it because I'm afraid if we stop for 2 or 3 weeks that we won't come back together again.
I'm,
But
I'm open to being here next week. Yeah, so
All right, let's do it.
All right.
That's the spirit.
I always look forward to it. I'll be here.
All right.
oh, good.
Good. All right. So we're in Matthew, and I believe we are about to start chapter, I skipped ahead a little bit, 16.
Yes.
Sweet 16. Now, believe it or not, we're more than halfway through Matthew. If you remember weeks ago when I did the little overview, I said that the author of Matthew thought of his book as his answer to the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. So he kind of modeled and structured his book, Matthew, on 5 kind of movements of like a symphony, 5, almost like they're 5 sections. Scholars have delineated what those sections are. I'm not going to rattle off all the numbers, but just know that we are in the 4th section, and they basically go, there's some kind of narrative or story, some healings, and then there's some exposition or explanation from Jesus about what it all means. Okay. And then that's how you know you're moving on to the next one. So after this section is done, which ends in middle of chapter 17, then we move into the 5th section, and that's it. And then after the 5th section ends, if you're tracking what I'm trying to say, then it's like an epilogue, but the epilogue is a long story of the passion and the crucifixion and the death. Okay. So last week we heard about the Canaanite woman, elsewhere described as a Syrophoenician woman. And we also did the feeding of the 4,000, not to be confused with the feeding of the 5,000. And now we're back into in the midst of Jesus either doing some healings or some interactions with the Pharisees, and then some kind of explanation or reflection upon that. So that gets us to chapter 16. And would anyone like to read maybe 1 to 12? Just 2 little sections, kind of.
I could do it.
Oh, thanks, Mike. What version are you reading from?
New King James.
Okay, this can be good.
Okay. Then the Pharisees and the Sadducees came, and testing him asked that he would show them a sign from heaven. He answered and said to them, When it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. Hypocrites. You know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. And he left them and departed. Now when his disciples had come to the other side, they had forgotten to take bread. Then Jesus said to them, "Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "It is because we have taken no bread." But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, "O you of little faith, why do you reason among yourselves because you have brought no bread? Do you not yet understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many baskets you took up? Nor the 7 loaves of the 4,000 and how many large baskets you took up? How is it you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees?" Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
All right. It's mine. So we've got this, not really a parable, but kind of a metaphor or two, or like a simile, I guess, of the weather and then the yeast and making of bread. What did y'all think of this? Or what sticks out to you?
Well, it looks like they're moving toward metaphorical thinking.
Yeah,
He's not actually talking about yeast. He's
yes, exactly.
talking about how this idea of a doctrine, you just need a little bit and it will spread and grow, right? Because this idea, oh, you only need a tiny bit of yeast to go through all the bread. So it's like, okay,
Yeah,
they've made that leap after he's called them a whole bunch of names.
that's right. They still keep coming back.
But Fritz. So,
Well, what I don't understand in this case then is that as an ingredient, yeast is necessary for the leavening of bread, and this is kind of a negative reference to yeast.
right,
And I don't quite understand that.
because he said before, we only need a little bit of believers, and that'll be like. And here he's saying that the same thing, the way I'm reading it,
Yeah.
the same bad thing. If you start believing the Pharisees, then this
Oh, I
like bad
see.
will spread.
Alright.
So like beliefs, I don't know,
Yeah.
will spread, whether it's good or bad.
So he's making distinction between different types of yeast.
Pretty much, yeah. Bad yeast or good yeast, kind of like the weeds and the flowers that we're talking about. That is played for comedy, kind of in verse 7, where they kind of look at each other whispering like, "You don't have any bread. Do you have any bread? You're getting bread?" It's like, these guys, they can't take metaphor, but you're right. They're starting to get it. Yeah.
Well, I think too, I mean, he's making a big deal about bread. I think,
Yeah.
he uses bread
Yeah.
to as himself.
It's gonna
or as-
take on its own metaphor later. Yeah.
Exactly,
Exactly.
Well, it was so essential
right,
to them,
Yeah.
it's a very survival
right.
in a way.
He's using a safe pathway to
Yes,
send his message.
that's right.
Oh, that's a good point. Am I just dense, or what is the sign of Jonah, and what is that about?
No,
I'm
I'm just
dense.
kidding. You are not dense, no.
Sure.
I
was
don't know
trying
what
to
that
look at
means
my
either.
notes.
It says compare with Matthew 12:39. Let's see. Hold on.
No sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah.
Oh, 39.
Like, I kind of get the idea that they're trying to test him, and he's not gonna like play their
Okay, yeah. So in chapter 12, verse 39, he said, "An evil and unfaithful generation searches for a sign, but it won't receive any sign except Jonah's sign. Just as Jonah was in the whale's belly for 3 days and 3 nights, so the human one, or the Son of Man, will be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights." So I
We were
guess,
gone-
what's that?
We were gone for a while. Our internet went down.
Sorry.
We're just talking about what he means by the sign of Jonah on verse 4.
Yeah,
And Greg just looked it up and said that just like Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days, the Son of Man will be in the center of the earth. Was that it?
that was it.
So we're just kind of
Found another footnote too.
Yeah.
This might help. Jonah's sign in chapter 12, Jesus interprets it in 2 ways. First, unlike Jews who refuse to change their hearts and lives, the Ninevites, that's in the book of Jonah, do change their hearts and lives. And then second, the time Jonah spent in the whale's belly for 3 days. So it's another comparison of Jews to non-Jews, you know.
Okay.
The Ninevites were able to change their hearts and lives in the story of Jonah, so I guess that's the sign. Yeah. But no, you weren't being dense. That's a deep reference. Yeah, deep cut is yeah.
So he's telling them. I'm just still trying to figure out what the message is here.
Exactly.
Maybe I should read the message. But he's
No, I
saying
was
I'm
just
not,
gonna say,
I'm sorry,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry, Carrie. I was just gonna say, I think it also refers to his death and his resurrection, the death and the time in the tomb. And the sign he's pointing him to is that he's going to be crucified and resurrected. I think that may be part of what Matthew's getting at as well.
Yeah.
So he's not gonna do a trick for them, right? I'm not,
No.
you're not gonna test me, I'm not gonna do tricks for you.
Exactly.
But
yeah.
if you wait, I'll die and be resurrected, or something dramatic and uncomfortable will happen.
Pretty much.
Probably the resurrection, which is the, coming out of the tomb. That's the big mystery.
Yeah, and
So-
oh, go ahead, David.
No,
Oh, sorry. Thought I heard a voice. You were nearing a part in the story where if you've been tracking a little bit, Jesus is yet to really talk about, except for that reference in chapter 12 about Jonah, his resurrection or what's coming later. Other gospel writers have him kind of talking about that early on. And I'm just kind of scanning ahead. The next two sections in this chapter we're reading, he really starts to parse out what's going to happen, especially as we're in the latter third of the book.
Mhm.
So it's funny, this Jonah sign and the this conversation about the yeast and all is really just him kind of walking in gently, wading into the metaphor a little bit, and then it's gonna take off a little bit in the next sections, it looks like. Yeah.
I missed several weeks, but when I opened my message,
Yeah.
I was still on page 12, and
Oh,
there's a
chapter-
section here called Jonah and the Evidence in chapter
Ooh.
12.
There you go.
Mhm.
Jonah and the evidence.
Jonah and the Evidence, and it's chapter 12, verse 38.
Am I the only one that's
Oh, here it is.
sweating like crazy? It is hot, right? Mud. I mean, normally I'm sweating already, but I'm like, it's not stopping.
That may be where the answer is. I was gone during that section, but
Oh,
Yeah,
back in chapter 12, verse 38, there's
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's more explicit about it there.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on because it'll probably make more sense as we go on. All right, I'm gonna read. Oh, go ahead, Leslie.
I just wanted to say, we have to remember when we're reading this, that he's writing this after all of this happened. So he knows how it comes out. So it's not like we're following along while he's walking with Jesus. That's not what's happened. He's writing this many years later. And
Excellent point.
Mhm.
Yeah.
have to remember that he's, because even here it says, then you realize that he's talking, Matthew may understand what's going on here more than, and he's saying things, but we're not really in his space, so we don't
Right.
know exactly what he's thinking, but you have to remember he's thinking back of what Jesus had said or possibly had said to them. So
Yeah, it's it's foreshadowing, but it's hard because the characters don't, sorry to call them characters, but they don't know, they're not in on the foreshadowing like we are. That's
because we know what's coming up.
exactly. Which leads me to verse 13. And I'm going to read from the CEB Bible, Common English Bible. I'm just going to read to the end of the chapter and we'll kind of go back and work through this a little bit. Now, when Jesus came to the area of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the human one is?" You probably have Son of Man in your verses. They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, And still others, Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. He said, and what about you? Who do you say that I am? Simon Peter said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Then Jesus replied, happy are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because no human has shown this to you. Rather, my Father who is in heaven has shown you. I tell you that you are Peter, and I'll build my church on this rock. The gates of the underworld won't be able to stand against it. I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Anything you fasten on earth will be fastened in heaven. Anything you loosen on earth will be loosened in heaven. Then he ordered the disciples not to tell anybody that he was the Christ. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he had to go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders, chief priests, and legal experts, and that he had to be killed and raised on the third day. Peter took a hold of Jesus and, scolding him, began to correct him. God forbid, Lord, this will not happen to you. But he turned to Peter and said, get behind me, Satan. You are a stone that could make me stumble, for you are not thinking God's thoughts, but human thoughts. Then Jesus said to his disciples, all who want to come after me must say no to themselves, take up their cross and follow me. All who want to save their lives will lose them, but all who lose their lives because of me will find them. Why would people gain the whole world but lose their lives? What will people give in exchange for their lives? For the Son of Man is about to come with the majesty of his Father with his angels, and then he will repay each one for what the person has done. I assure you that some standing here won't die before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. End of chapter. So that last section, the big word that if you play spelling bee on your app from the New York Times or anything, you do, me too. If you want a big, like 13-letter word, it's eschatology. And I'm not going to try to spell it for you, but it's from the Greek word eschaton, which means the end or the end times, like end of the world. So eschatology is the study of the end of the world or end of the time. This is that verses 24 to 28 are a good example of Jesus kind of, or Matthew, let's say that. Matthew having Jesus speak about end times and eschatology, the idea that Jesus will come back, what we call the second coming, Christ will come back again. And it ends with an interesting line. I assure you that some here won't die before they see the human one coming in his kingdom. So this kind of idea of eternal life promised for some. Any thoughts on that or questions, anything? We'll work backwards, yeah.
And this applies all throughout, not just this passage we just read, but how does one reconcile the conundrum of these things being written a generation or more later, and yet quoting Jesus as if these things had been written down or just passed along by hearsay or whatever? It's like how much of the quotes of Jesus' actual words are true, or even have a hint of truth to them?
Yeah, or let me tweak your vocabulary, or fact.
A fact.
Yeah, but that he literally spoke. Because I think there is a truth to them all.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, I added literal truth.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that how many work can verifiably we say, boy, I think there's very little in here that you can say we've got 100% proof on, or even more than 50% proof that Jesus said the words exactly. We're trusting the tradition, the hand me down of the oral and early written culture from these first generations, that the whole reason it's written in a book was because he did say these things and because they were earth-shattering. It depends on who's writing and who the source is. Like Mark's gospel tends to be something that's written, it's very short and kind of sticks to the point. So you kind of want to affirm that maybe Mark has it about right. Mm-hmm. And it's also the earliest one written. Matthew has got more things to kind of get across in his message, having lived with Christianity a little bit longer than Mark. So he's taking Mark's things plus his own sources and all, and what he's heard of Jesus, and he's kind of just stringing it into a narrative, a bit like you take a movie, you adapt a book into a movie, and you have to kind of retell it some things are direct from the book and some are not. So it's hard to say, but there's scholars that have wrestled over this. And this was the big brunt of the work of the Jesus, not movements, that's what we're in now, the Jesus Project, I think it was. Yeah. And that's
Seminar, Jesus Seminar.
Jesus Seminar. Thank you. That's it. With John Dominic Crossan and some of these other guys who really wanted to go through and say, what can we say actually happened and what did Jesus actually say? You know, and it's interesting, but my little exchange with you about fact and truth applies to all of that as well. I mean, it applies to all of scripture, which is you can go searching for all those things, but it may just make the dominoes fall for you more, more. But when actually, if you kind of look at the overall truth, the message, it makes sense.
Do you think that the people who wrote the Gospels, the Matthew, Mark, do you think that they, by the time they wrote them, that they were able to think more metaphorically, like these things that Jesus is saying?
Yeah.
Or, because it seems like a lot of times the apostles believed that Jesus was the Son of God, but when he would talk about losing your life, even though you've gained all this, it's like they didn't get what he was talking about.
Right. Well, and different gospel writers disagree on the disciples. Mark makes them out to be almost foolish, that they don't understand what's going on all the way to the end, through the end. And then in Matthew, it's like a slight softening of it. Part of it's because of this Peter section we just read, which is kind of important for the church. But I think ultimately none of them know for sure. They're just kind of putting themselves in the shoes of the disciples and be like, if I was following this guy, he said, drop everything, follow me, take up your cross and follow me. And then he's saying he's the Son of Man or Son of God. I wouldn't believe it until I saw some proof. I'm guessing that's what the writers were thinking, but they're all on different wavelengths a little bit, if that makes sense. Yeah.
The other thing that
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, please, you go ahead.
Okay, Carol.
Well, I was just yeah, go ahead, Carol.
Hold on, David.
I was just gonna say, the other thing that struck me about that reading is that Jesus compared Peter to a rock two different times.
Yeah.
And one was a good comparison and one was a bad comparison.
Yeah, good observation.
So a rock is something that's steadfast and stable, but also a stumbling block.
But it's also a big, thick thing in the way.
Good yeast and bad yeast.
Good yeast and bad yeast. That's exactly right. Yeah. Go ahead. Let's do us.
Well, I was just going to say that I think you can define truth in a lot of different ways. And I think that we need to understand that the context that this comes from, we're talking about what is largely an oral culture. There is written, but a lot of their traditions, a lot of the way things are passed on is through oral tradition. And I think to expect oral tradition to have the kind of absolute word for word accuracy that we do now with tape recorders and people that take shorthand and things like that. I think that's a pretty big expectation. And I don't think that was the understanding they had of whether something was truthful or not. I think the understanding pretty much was that they were trying to convey the central message, the essence of what's being passed on, rather than trying to be like word for word perfect or even perfect in detail. It's just what they're trying to do is convey this central message. And sometimes I think we get that confused, that if we don't have the same kind of accuracy in every word or every specific detail in the Bible, then we don't have any accuracy at all. But that wasn't the purpose of the Bible. That wasn't the purpose of what the apostles were trying to, or the writers of the different books of the Bible are trying to achieve. And this passage really points at one of the greatest problems probably that the early church was facing, and that is the fact that these were written after 30, 40, 50 years after Jesus had died, and Jesus hadn't come back yet. And the expectation they were having was from passages like these that Jesus was going to come back and people were still going to be living. So how do they explain this? How do they maintain the story when all the people who have known Jesus personally have died? And so they begin writing these stories and gospels and things like that to maintain the story as the nearness of Jesus' return is being pushed further and further back. It's a big issue. It's one of the biggest issues for the Christian church to begin with, was why is the parousia, which means Jesus' return, why 2,000 years later, 2,100 years later, why has he still not returned? And so they have to deal with this in various ways. And Peter tries to deal with it and other people try to deal with it. But the fact of the matter is, it's a difficult issue you look at this passage and you can say, well, maybe the fact that Jesus, the return he was talking about, was when after his resurrection, and the fact that he returns through the church and the body, that the deeds he does and Jesus' work is contained in the church itself. Anyway, this is a really complex passage. It deals with several issues. It deals with the Jesus delayed returning. It deals with what the Roman Catholic Church refers to, what their basis for Peter as the first pope and the primacy of the Bishop of Rome still now is based on this, largely on this passage of Peter being the rock upon which he's going to build the church. There's
Right.
a lot here. Yeah.
And it's called classically, and we observe it as a feast day too, in January, the Confession of Peter, which sounds a little bit like he's atoning for sins or something, but that's not at all. It means he literally, whatever the meaning of confess means, but he articulates for the first time in scripture, because of where Matthew is placed, he basically says, you're the Messiah, you're the Christ, and he's rewarded with the keys to heaven. So that if you see most icons of Peter or paintings, he's got little key, little like looks like key to the city usually. And that's why we get all the great jokes about St. Peter at the pearly gates waiting. That's like, it sounds like a punishment to me if you have to be the bouncer for heaven, but maybe Peter enjoyed it. Yeah, I would rather be fishing, but okay. And David, you're of course 100% right. I don't need to add anything else really. Just say that verse 28. I assure you, so I'm standing here. That's Matthew in some ways having Jesus say words of kind of pastoral comfort to the people who are still waiting and wondering, what about, I thought Jesus was coming back in my lifetime. If there are people still waiting, we're already a generation removed at this point. By the time you get to Luke, who's probably written another 10 years later, Luke is smart enough to go, okay, Jesus, as we've been talking about earlier, speaks in metaphor or spoke in metaphor a lot. This whole thing of his coming back, while true, may not have been word for word fact. I'm coming back on June 12th, 015. It's nothing like that, or whatever you see on the billboards. Instead, it was we have to interpret for ourselves, what does it mean, especially when we're talking about a God who is above and beyond time. What does a second coming look like? That's kind of what it is.
I wonder on Jesus, if and when he does come back, will anybody believe that he's Jesus?
Would we
People are
notice?
so horrible.
It's a great question. When Jesus says here, take up your cross and follow me, that's also in Mark. And when Mark has Jesus say, take up your cross and follow me, that is, they mean it, because they thought the world was ending when Mark was written, because Rome was sacking Jerusalem. We're in the process of it. So it's literally like, get ready to be crucified along with Jesus, so that's one dramatic way to interpret it. Now, fast forward a couple decades and you get to Matthew saying, take up your cross and follow me, but it's kind of in the context of everything else he's saying. Then you get to Luke, who says, take up your cross daily. He adds the word daily in English. He didn't add the English, he added the Greek. But take up your cross daily, because Luke said Jesus couldn't possibly have been saying, get ready to be crucified, everybody, or pick up a cross. He was speaking in metaphor. So you need to take up your cross every day. you need to be a follower of Christ every day and be willing to, suffer probably more a social fate than a physical fate, although unfortunately that still happens for another couple hundred years. Whew, sorry.
It's not too much of an aside. I just had some thoughts to share
Do it.
about your question about accuracy in oral culture. Because I had a neighbor over and we had dinner, and he's from a nomadic culture and talked about how their oral history is more accurate than their written, because they've been conquered and the victors write what they want.
That's right.
But
Hey, case in point.
if it's from a mother or father to a child about your own history, tell it to you accurately. And I had shared that I just read this thing I found very inspirational. I hope it's not too far afield for us, but it was a woman who was in a Gullah community, a former slave community, and she had a song. And she said it had been passed down from generation to generation, from mother to child. They sang it as a nursery rhyme and said, if you learn the song, you'll find your way home. And it had been passed down, and then the linguist found this and was able to correlate it to a Senegalese song from a certain village. And they were able to connect her back to her. And they put it had been hundreds of years through all sorts of trauma, but they put the phonetic, spelling of what she sang next to this ancient song phonetically. And there was only about 1 or 2 syllables in this lengthy song that had changed.
Wow.
And so they were just startled by the accuracy of oral tradition. And I think we tend to think, if it's not in a book, I don't really trust it. But it was just timely to me, because I just had that conversation a couple of days ago, that for many people, if it's told to you by your family, you trust it more.
Right.
Because nobody else could have gotten in there and changed it. And so when we talk about it's been oral for so long, is it still accurate? I think my thinking on that is changing after some of these conversations, that maybe it could be incredibly accurate. It could be verbatim if this was something important to a person to teach their kids. So
That's beautiful.
I just hope that's not too far away from what we were talking about.
No, that's great. It's really,
This accuracy of
it's a
communication.
good sermon element. Steal that Senegalese. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
You'll find your way home, and she did. I thought it was really very beautiful, like overcoming all that trauma to still find your way home.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I liked it. And I think some of this is what the early church was telling each other. Like, if we remember these words and we remember the point, like, we'll be able to keep this with us. Or in the Old Testament, right? David, you talked about that a lot. Like, this would be pulled around a campfire. And if we keep these stories, we'll have hope and we'll have community cohesion.
Yeah.
So go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, it just, and it to me, it's so fascinating. We kind of touched on this maybe a couple of weeks ago, but just the notion that how things work and the synchronicity of things over the course of time in the universe. Would this even have happened if the Hebrews were not an oppressed people?
Right.
If they were not under the thumb of Rome, would there have been any reason for them to believe that there was a need for the Messiah, even though their expectation of the Messiah was not what it ended up being? But even if the Messiah was just somebody who, like Jesus, was talking about inner changes and inner life and connection with God and all that, and people felt like, well, everything's just hunky-dory.
Yeah.
We love those Pharisees, and the law is the law, and we believe it all. It would have had no meaning. So it's just kind of interesting how all the puzzle pieces just kind of fit together in history. One thing leads to another. It's either something happens and it confirms, or something happens and it's a reaction against, and still there's this kind of flow of experience and thought and all that leads a people to a certain point. And I just think, I guess what the meaning of in the fullness of time,
Exactly. Yeah.
when things just kind of coalesced in a certain way to even allow this to happen, let alone encourage it to happen.
Yeah, as you're, I was just thinking about the Beatitudes there,
Mhm.
like blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the oppressed, because if you weren't under the thumb of Rome, would you have seen the Messiah,
Mhm.
right? Like, in those moments is what I was thinking, that's
Mhm.
when things are revealed to you. And I think a lot of people who I'm gonna be careful and acknowledge David's point that some suffering is not redemptive and it's just
No, that's true.
horrible and damaging. But sometimes I think when you're in a bad spot, that's when you're more open.
Mhm.
But yeah, I love that. Thank you.
It's great stuff.
Sorry.
No, this is fascinating. We're all hanging on every word. I just leave you with one little slightly cute thing, which is the one of my favorite phrases in all of scripture is "Get behind me, Satan," and that is because it's a little bit of a euphemism where Peter, I mean, Jesus is not really calling Peter Satan, but it is a great illustration of how 1 second he is the model of humans. He's the rock, which is in Greek means Petra, which is where he gets the name Peter. In Aramaic, it was Cephas, Cephas, which sometimes pops up in scripture. I think when we did Acts, Paul would sometimes call him Cephas. So they both mean rock. So this is the origin story, if you will, of how Peter, like David was saying, became the kind of first pope, nominally the head of the church. But how quickly things change, because in the next breath he says, "Oh no, Lord, you can't die," and then he says, "Get behind me, Satan," which seems like an extreme response. So in seminary, we all just started joking and using that as like a term, like somebody passing you a chocolate in class, would you like any? And you're like, "Get behind me, Satan." And that's kind of what that is. He doesn't literally think the devil is there tempting him, but the way Peter is talking is reminiscent of how the devil talked to Jesus back in chapter 4 when he was in the wilderness, which is acknowledge you're the Son of God, but then because you're the Son of God, make this stone turn to bread and blah, blah, blah. Start testing. So Peter is basically testing Jesus, saying, don't let that happen to you. And if you're Jesus and you're going to die, or you've somehow figured this out, and you've got to proceed with this, what you don't want is people getting in the middle of your path going, you don't need to die, don't do this, and then you go, oh, get behind me, Satan. Like, don't, I could easily be taken astray from this. So that's kind of what's
I'll
Yeah.
just add to that, Greg, that we assume when he used the term Satan, that he's using it as a name for the devil. And actually, Satan actually means accuser or adversary, like this. So this may not be him necessarily saying you're the devil, but he's saying that you're performing this function right now. You're on the wrong side. You're the accuser, the adversary. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So I have a question then.
Sure.
So, is Satan and the devil the same thing?
That's a good question.
Behind that question, there's a lot of history about the Satan, and behind that question is the question is the Satan, is the devil, is it a personality, is it a force? It's that's a deeper question than is easy to answer in a 1 sentence or 2 sentence answer, because if you look at the history of the Satan, you see it changes through the Old Testament and into the New Testament, and it was developed even further with Greek thought and things like that. That's a really in-depth question, Pam. That's and I don't have a definitive answer. I think you can argue that that's a real bone of contention among theologians.
I'm sure.
That's a perceptive question. Yeah, because
the Christian tradition
devil
says that.
comes from devil comes from diabolos, which is another Greek term. Satan comes from it means like accuser, adversary, and that has more reference back to the way it was used in the Old Testament. Diabolos is more of a contemporary, more of a Greek understanding, and giving a personality or a name to Satan. Yeah.
And part of the lore of Satan and the devil is, if Yahweh, God is so powerful, then it's like Batman. God needs a villain of equal or of someone to contend with. So we, humanity, kind of build up the idea that there is kind of like an anti-God or anti-Christ who kind of that is a matched wit with God. And like David said there, more and more, I mean, I think I've let it escape from time to time that I don't really believe in hell. And that's not quite true. What I mean is I don't believe in a little pit with fire and everyone's eternally. I mean it more of it's kind of a state of mind, like your life on earth can be kind of a living hell, an existence, this sort of a torture. And I think that's harder for humans to accept. It's easy for us to pin it on a person. But like the JFK assassination, a conspiracy is overwhelming, but if you can just say Lee Harvey Oswald did it, then he's the villain. And then, now we can go similar with the devil. Well, if we got a devil, we can put some horns on him and give him a little goatee, and he can be the snake, and even he can answer all those questions where we had questions about everything. And that's the easy way out, I think.
Well, it also helps.
I have something to say on that topic.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Okay, so I mean, David's right. It's complex. There's a lot to it. But years ago, I took an anthropology class, and in the class, they said, we are humans. We are humans because we say we are humans. We are the only ones that speak this language. We are the, English, French, whatever. We are the only ones who can say we are humans. I think going towards what Greg said too, the devil, Satan, people wrote the Bible. We chose those names. So yes, we need to look at it in depth and philosophical and stuff, but also realize the devil's the devil because we said it.
Right.
That's a name we gave it, or him, or whatever. Okay, come here, honey.
Well, we know she's working.
That's really
whatever
good.
we want. And like I said, there is more to it, but simplicity, whatever, you know what I'm trying to say. The devil is the devil because we picked that name. And yes, there's roots to it. Satan is Satan because we picked that. Do we choose to combine them or not? We are the humans. We make that choice.
That's right.
Well, and I think what you're pointing to too is what is the function of the Satan or the devil, and it's to help answer the question of where does evil come from, and sin, temptation, things like that. It has to do with theodicy, the idea that how could an all-loving, all-powerful God,
He's had enough of that.
David, it's like
powerful God, allow, where does evil come from? Anyway,
a lot of commotion.
yeah, I'm getting.
Did you want to say to the cat, get behind me, Satan?
Yeah.
It's not the most talking about Satan. We get to hear a baby see a cat. It's not bad, guys. No, sorry, I interrupted you though. Go ahead.
What I think too is that where did it come from? Now I really think about when you tell someone, go to hell. I mean, boy, where does that come from?
Well, there are a lot of that comes from other cultures, Pam. It comes from the Hebrews from their captivity, and they developed some of their theology from being in different captivity. It also comes from the Hellenistic culture around them, where they believe in an underworld and an abode of the dead, and it's much more developed because of the Hebrew contact with other cultures, their own view of hell or whatever. The original Hebrew view of that, as well as most we can understand, is Sheol. And that's where both the good people and the bad people all go. Everybody ends up in Sheol, and it's kind of a gray place, and it's not quite, it's not quite, it's not quite living, not quite dead, in the sense that, so it's something you want to avoid it for as long as possible, so you lived a certain kind of life, so you didn't go to Sheol, but the concept of a hell as an eternal punishment, that was very much a developing and evolving belief in among the Jews that came about because of the influence of the cultures around them. It wasn't in their original theology in the Old Testament.
Yeah, Dante helped a lot too with a lot of that. And your mention of Sheol reminds me that Jackie's point in the chat was about the well of the whale and Jonah being kind of a purgatory as well. And, you know, I would be remorsed on my last Bible study. I'd be remiss, sorry, to not point out when we did the Lost class last year that you get to the last episode, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, and you get to the last episode, you find out that part of the last season, the cast members were all in a purgatory, good and evil, so to speak, and they were processing through their past and their lives on earth before they could move on together. So that is just in our culture and our thinking, and pops up in our literature, you know, going back when it's an oral culture, and all of these things are part of the, you know, just part of the fabric of, you know, human history, just how we tell stories, how we analyze the nature and the creation and the universe around us.
You know, even total non-believers will say, oh, there's no such thing as demons. Will refer to wrestling with their demons, you know.
Right.
You know, so some of those words and some of that thought, it's like the word conversion. When, you know, when somebody feels like I've been converted, well, you know, that puts it in that realm of God talk, which makes me a little uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
But I'm not at all uncomfortable to say, oh, I had a great visit with my string today and I had this major breakthrough. What's the difference between a conversion and a breakthrough? It's a matter of nomenclature, it's a matter of semantics. But like David alluded to when he was talking about the many shades of meaning of the word Satan, some of those really refer more to the kinds of things that modern psychology has identified that we do have to deal with to change our lives, to change ourselves for the better. I don't think there's anybody here that can say, my life is so perfect, there's not a thing about myself that I would change.
Oh, my gosh.
You know, as opposed to mission that, you know, really we are our own worst enemies. We
Yeah.
get to the point where we can identify maybe why we're motivated on certain levels, and some of the traumas and some of the events and all that kind of thing, relationships that have added to all that. And the tricky part, and I'm sorry, Jesus, it's not all that easy, but the tricky part is to try and undo all of that damage. You know, at one point, for some reason, I reckoned I compared it to the tricky job of a surgeon trying to take scar tissue out of something.
Yeah.
Scar tissue is the remnant of something that wasn't necessarily bad, but it's there and it's in the way, and you know, it needs to be extricated.
It's a great analogy.
Yeah, yeah,
Pretty-
that makes a lot of sense to me, that scar tissue, yeah.
And I think if you consider what Jesus always called his disciples to do, rather than what people sometimes call them to do now. Jesus always implied it was a journey. He says, pick up your cross and follow.
Right.
It's not an accomplished thing. It's a journey. And the best we can do is just try to emulate Christ and emulate Jesus in our actions. And as you say, scar tissue is incredibly difficult. In fact, sometimes scar tissue just can't be gotten rid of. In fact, the emblematic of that is the fact that Jesus, even post-resurrection, Jesus still had the scars. He was resurrected from the dead, but the scars were still there. And as far as we know, they're still there. And that just shows us, you know, that there's serious implications to what happened. And some of those things are going to be with us for all time. But that doesn't mean we can't still follow. It just means that, yeah.
No, exactly right. And one way to think of it is the scars are proof that you're still living,
Right.
because you've got the scars to show it.
And David, isn't the impulse to follow really just another way of saying faith? you know, if you're following and you don't know where it's leading you, it takes kind of faith.
It's
Right.
a trust, it's a trust that goes beyond what we can actually see. It's a faith that, and really, I think if we really want to consider faith in its truest sense, faith is not so much believing certain things. Faith is trusting in God, trusting in Jesus, because what he's shown us through what he's done and what he's done in our own lives. And, you know, that it's a trust in him, not a trust in circumstances or a trust in understanding. It's just, even though I don't understand, even though this doesn't make sense, even though I have all these scars, still I can trust in you.
Mm.
What you did.
Amen
Well
to
said.
that.
Amen.
Well said,
Amen to
David.
that.
That's a good way to end.
Mhm.
Of course, I'm gonna keep talking. Only
I
to
think
say,
this has been the best Bible study.
it's a good
today.
one.
I mean, this is just really, really hit home with me, and all this wonderful discussion we can have. Just,
Amen.
yeah.
So when some of you gather next week, you're going to get into chapter 17. You're going to hear the story of the Transfiguration, which we always hear on Sunday, the Sunday before Lent begins, all 3 lectionary years. But the Feast of the Transfiguration, which is a major feast day in the Eastern Orthodox Church, they the feast day is August 6th, and the Episcopal Church has designated that when August 6th, the Feast of the Transfiguration, falls on a Sunday, that it takes precedent over whatever the normal lessons are that day. So I've already explained this to Charity and for Lauren, because I won't be here, and you're going to we've already laid out the leaflet and everything, but basically whatever the assignment, the 4th, 15th Sunday of after Pentecost, whatever that is, that goes away that one day, and it becomes all about the Transfiguration, which is kind of cool. So watch for that. And when you read it next week, I want you to think of it as a bit of Jesus starting to give the disciples, and thus the reader, more of a window into what we're talking about, who he is, and why this Messiah, why Peter's all upset. You can't die, because Peter's like, how can I have a Messiah? I'm thinking King David in my head, conqueror, you know, and he's going to die. That doesn't make any sense. So the Transfiguration starts to kind of process what this Messiah is and who he is. Okay.
Yeah.
There's your tag for next time. Friends, it's been a journey. Let me just leave it at that. It's been a journey, and I love having it. I hope you all, I just love what's come out of this group over the years. We've whittled it into and grown it into a really beautiful pastoral group here too. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Stay dry.
Yeah.
Take care.
Take
God
care.
bless.
Saying flood warnings